Hey there, this is Michelle at East Ave Art, and today I'm doing a tutorial of me painting some gouache peaches. I painted this in my Etchr Sketchbook, and as you can see, I taped some washi tape around the edges of my sketchbook, and I gave myself a little bit of extra washi tape on the other side of the page just to sort of, protect the other sheet of paper from, my paintbrush getting out of control. And I also decided to forego my typical approach to drawing, which is to sketch out my drawing first and then transfer it to the watercolor paper. And usually I do that just because I'm trying to protect the paper from all of the erasing that I typically do. But I feel like a peach is pretty easy to draw. They're just kind of wonky, ovally circles. But nevertheless, I'm still sketching pretty lightly, like you can kind of barely see that as I'm sketching. And the reason for that is it's just my preference that the pencil marks don't show through the paint. Some people like that. I prefer those pencil marks to not be visible. So, even though I may be sketching a little bit darker than I normally would, just for the benefit of the viewer, I will, lighten those up before I start painting. I'm using Winsor Newton gouache in tubes, which I have obviously put into these wells that you see, and I'm ready to hit the page with kind of a yellowy, peachy color. And one of the big differences between gouache and watercolor, I feel like, is that there's just more opacity with gouache. It's a little bit thicker. I find it still easier to work with than acrylic, just because I think there's more of a transition, an easier transition to make between watercolor and the water to paint ratio and gouache. Then I find that a little bit easier to do than working with acrylics. So I'm going to put this kind of base yellowy, bright, peachy yellow or orangey yellow down on my peaches to start, and then I'll keep building up the color as I go. One thing that's like a little bit different about gouache as opposed to watercolor that I've found is with watercolor you have to go from light to dark because it's really nearly impossible to lighten up once you have put down like a dark watercolor color. Whereas with gouache, because there's like more opacity, you can really play around and go back and forth. Like I did start with a lighter color. That's probably because of my experience with watercolor, but you'll see at different points I sort of go back and forth between different tones. So sometimes I'm painting like really dark, and then sometimes I come in with a lighter color. So with gouache, it's a little bit different, and you have maybe a little bit more freedom to sort of let the painting unfold how you want to, and maybe experiment with the shades that you're using. And I'm adding some darker colors into my peach, just building up the color a little bit. If it looks a little bit too loud to me, I will, clean off my brush and then, have it damp and just sort of scrub around that color to help it to sort of blend with that yellow base color around me. And I'm also trying to build up some shadows already, where there's like a divot or a crack in the peach. I'm trying to show that. But I feel like if you're trying to get into painting or you're trying to learn a new medium, which is, I feel like where I'm at with gouache, it's very much a learning stage for me at this point. It's really helpful to paint something like something from nature, like fruit, for example, because you've never really seen a peach that looks identical to any other kind of peach. So whatever sort of decisions I make, it's gonna look like a peach, right? So, so it really is helping me as an artist to learn how to use this medium without the pressure of it looking like perfectly like something. So for example, if I was trying to like paint something architectural, your eye would just know that something was wrong with the, you know, whatever I was painting. Whereas with something out of nature, like a piece of fruit, it just isn't going to look perfect. It's not going to look like any other peach. So that just gives me a lot of freedom to play around with the shading and see how the gouache interacts, see how to build up color in gouache, and, you know, find a style that really works for me. And you can see I'm following the same process for each one of the peaches. I'm putting down that really kind of golden yellow color that I like a lot. And then I build in more of like the peachy pink colors that, you know, obviously peaches are known to be. And I feel like that's kind of a process that worked for me. Just to kind of focus almost on one peach at a time, and or a couple peaches at a time. I did them, I think, in batches, really. And yeah, I thought this was a process that I liked and that worked for me. One thing I focused on in this painting is like the shading or the shadow that the leaves, and or in this case, what I'm working on here is the shadow that the top peach would be casting over the peach that's somewhat behind it. So I did a lot of work in this painting in particular in just slowly building up the shadow. So right now you can see it's kind of like those two peaches look like they're sort of melded together, and I'm gonna keep building up those shadows and, you know, adding a little bit more darkness to my colors so that those peaches are differentiated with the color and the darker shadow. And one of the ways that I achieved a shadow look, I haven't quite gotten there yet, was I used the complementary color for red, which, so what sits on the opposite of the color wheel is sort of like a greenish, bluish, and I did mix a little bit of that in once I got to the shadows. But you can see I've already kind of like laid down a little bit of that shadow and on the peach that's behind the peach in the center. And you can also see me doing that somewhat with the leaves that are over, like hanging over the peach that I'm working on right now. So as I'm working on these peaches, I'm just trying to think about how to convey somewhat realistically that these are objects that, you know, light and shadow are a component there. Oh, and so here you can see me adding a little bit in of that, you know, sort of dark shadow color. Now that comes off really harsh at this point, and I know that. It looks kind of ugly right now, but you'll see I'll continue to build up the color of the peaches, and I will also like tone down that shadow color as well. So now that I've added that shadowy color there, and you can see it in the center of my palette, I used a little bit of blue and green and red mixed together to achieve that color. And what I'm gonna do is sort of lighten that shadow up. I know that sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, but I wanna just smooth out that very harsh line that you see from what I painted. So one of the ways that I'll achieve that is to, again, just kind of clean off my brush and scrub around there to get, you know, the colors to blend together a little bit better. And I'm just going to keep working on that actually in several places, both where the peach overhangs the other peach, where the leaves overhang the peaches, And also I added a little bit of that shadow color in a few cases to that like center part of the peach that's, you know, got like the little bit of split, and there you see me doing that there. And so I'll add a little bit of that color, and then I'll scrub it out a little bit so that it doesn't look just like a harsh line. It just kind of seems like a little bit of a shadow. So I just kind of keep working away at this until I feel like there's a little bit of like natural gradients between the shadow areas and the actual color of the peach. And I'm gonna stop talking and just kind of let you see how I do this and how much time I spend trying to smooth out those color variations. Now that I've got my shadows in place, I decided I wanted to also darken up a little bit of the peach. So I'm mixing up some yellow and some red to get a little bit of a more dramatic color for some of the red little peachy bits that you see on the peach itself. So I'm building up those areas as well. And like I said earlier in this video, this is kind of like the beauty of gouache, that I can darken and lighten as however I want. Like I've already put down kind of the darkest paint that I'm going to use, which is that shadow color. But I can also build up some of this like lighter peach color as well. And the paint has the opacity to sort of like allow for that to happen. So I think that's a really cool feature of gouache. So at this point, I'm painting the leaves, and one of the things I've noticed about peach leaves is they're sort of long and skinny, and they come to a point, and they're pretty bright, like they're a fairly verdant green. So I thought this was like a really fun color to add to this piece. And one of the things that I really notice is before I paint the leaves in, that white with like the shadow and the peach underneath it, it looks really drastic and it doesn't look great. But something about adding that green of the leaf, it makes the peaches look more natural or something. So it doesn't quite look as, you know, the shadow color doesn't quite look as off to me once I add the actual leaf color. It all kind of looks more how it should, I suppose. So I eventually added a little detailing and shading to the leaves, and at this point I wanted to put sort of a bluish fun background because I'm envisioning this piece as being in the trees. Now if I had it to do it over again, I would have done this first actually, because as you can see, I'm just taking some watercolor and dropping it into a wet background. And I might have done that first before I got into painting the peaches, because obviously with the gouache, the opacity of it, it would have gone over the watercolor pretty well. And I ended up having to do like a lot of detail work, just to bring the watercolor, like the blue, up to the oranges or peaches without painting on the peaches. And so that was actually ended up being more annoying than I planned for. And at this point, you can see I'm adding in the stems that are connecting all the peaches together. And now it's time for my favorite part, which is the reveal. So I pull off the washi tape and reveal sort of these nice clean lines. And yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with it. It's a good mixture of gouache and watercolor with the watercolor background there. I thought that was kind of like a fun touch. So hopefully you enjoyed this and you learned something. And please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. Thanks so much for watching.